Hi, welcome back to the next episode of Empaths Anonymous. I'm Christina.
I'm Danny.
Thanks for joining us again. We have a doozy for you. I'm so excited for you guys to hear this.
I cannot begin to express, I think, how grateful I am to have the access that we have in such a short period of time. And we do have Christina to thank for that, obviously. Being the networker and communicator that she is.
If there's one thing I can be, it's outside talking to people.
It's true. So today is so special. I feel like it's very special to have two guests back to back. That's awesome.
Yes.
So today we have therapist and professional healer Nisrine Maktabi.
Yes.
Whom we talked about this in the interview, but Christina met at the Kathy Heller conference in Los Angeles recently, and is such a wonderful spirit and such a lovely person to speak with, because she meets you with no judgment and she has so much knowledge about things and very specific things that we talk about and touch on the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. When we met, we were all like, it was lunchtime. And I went out of my comfort zone and I just like found people just like sitting by themselves. And I kind of chose the people that are just little ladies who are just a little different, have a little spice, have a little flavor. There was this girl with like rainbow colored hair. And then there was like a couple middle-aged probably ladies and a few others. I'm like, okay, they seem like a little diverse little group over here. So I went and joined, and Nisrine came too. And we were all just kind of going around the circle talking about what our podcasts are, if we had them. Not everybody did, or some people were going to launch podcasts like Nisrine says she is. So be on the lookout. We'll let you know when it officially launches. She's still 100%. In the beginning stages. But I said what our podcast was about, and she literally like, you need to have me on. Did you know that being an empath is like being an octopus? And I'm like, what?
Okay, I had no idea that she said that to begin with. So when she referenced the octopus in the interview, which you'll hear, it's fantastic. I hope my face didn't change. But it's an incredible analogy. I didn't know that you had heard that she had referenced the octopus before. It makes so much sense. It's one. I mean, I'm probably gonna say this for every single episode, but it's 100% one of my favorite conversations so far. I think I've just had in life in my short 32 years.
Yeah. Oh, she came right out the gate, like speaking to you. I'm like, oh, Danny's locked in.
Yeah, I gotta be.
Shit.
It was so refreshing, and it's almost like therapy outside of therapy.
Oh yeah, yeah. So we're excited to get into that. What is in your cup today?
What's in my cup is water, you guys. First of all,
twice in a row, 2 episodes.
Twice in a row, because of just the timing of it all. I also have like outside stuff to do. I have school. I have things to take care of, so I can't be working. I do be working, and I cannot just be drinking like wine all the time, which we don't. I think there's like one episode where we drink wine.
Right.
So yeah, water. And because I've been noticing that my skin is looking a lot more clear, it's clearing up.
It is.
And I think it's due to...
Is it the rescue?
It might be the rescue. Tower 28.
Ugh, we love her.
The SOS spray.
Yeah.
Chokehold.
Asian woman owned.
Oh.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
And that's
the first in Sephora.
And it's also a clean brand, is it not?
And clean.
Yeah. Period.
I'm wearing their blush. Actually, that was unplanned.
Same.
Look at us.
I think it's office hours. In my cup, other than hydration station, is I'm showing up. I think I mentioned this. Just grateful today. I'm showing up with definitely a full heart and spirit.
I love that.
I feel full.
Is there a certain reason for that?
Oh, it could be. I do feel like I've accepted some things. I think I've come into like maybe the next level of like forgiveness of myself for something. I am also in a place of feeling proud, not in a pretentious or annoying way, but just proud of myself for showing up even when it's hard and still showing up as like authentically myself. Anyway, sister, what's in your cup?
So if you live in Temecula or the Murriettas, you will know this place. It's called The Press Espresso, Black owned.
I think they're up to like 5 or 6 locations in the Murriettas and the Temecula's.
Yeah, but I had the BSC, which is brown sugar caramel latte.
Yeah.
Danny brought it to me earlier, but I had already had a coffee and I woke up. This is going into my life cup. I woke up on 10, maybe even 11. I woke up like, okay, I have all these things on my checklist today. We're going to get everything done. Okay.
I know. When I came home, she had on biker shorts. I'm like, are you going somewhere? Like
I,
ready to go do some shit, activities.
you know what I felt like this morning? Anxiety and Inside Out too.
You
That's how I felt this morning.
guys, Inside Out too.
Yeah, not necessarily anxious, but the personality of anxiety in the movie. I'm like, that's who I was this morning.
Yeah, scrambled.
Scrambled eggs.
Today on the podcast, we have a wonderful guest. We have Nisrine Maktabi, who is the founder of Finding Your Inner Oasis coaching, consulting, and therapy. She is dedicated to peeling the layers of unhelpful survival strategies that keep the intergenerational and intercultural disconnect and trauma functioning. She gently guides you to belong to yourself by finding and entering your inner oasis. More authentic relationships with oneself, your calling, family, and community are attained, leading to a fulfilled, rich life experience. Welcome, Nisrine. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing great. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see
Great
you
to
as
see
well.
you.
Thank you so much for being here. So, at the beginning of every episode, Christina and I do a segment called What's in Your Cup. So, we want to know what is in your literal cup today. What are you drinking?
Right, I'm drinking spirulina.
Nice.
Delicious.
One cup I have spirulina and one cup I have water. And this
Yes.
is my LA cup,
Always
which
double
is where I met
fisting.
you. Yeah, I know.
Oh, that's right. I love that choice. So intentional. The LA Cup.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that's where Nisrine and Christina met at the
We
Kathy
did.
Heller, correct? Kathy
Yep.
Heller conference.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So nice. So that's where we met. And that's how we have Nisrine on our podcast today as our second guest, which is such a special treat. As far as your physical cup, spirulina, getting the energy going, how are you feeling today? How are you showing up?
I'm feeling, on one hand, very excited to be with you to talk about empathy, and also a little bit tired because it's the end of the day here in Toronto while you're in LA. So it's great. I'm happy.
Right.
Good.
Well, thank you for spending your time with us. We know that it's later over there for you.
Yes, thank you so much. So we'll just get right into it with our first question. Obviously, the title of our podcast being Empaths Anonymous, we're very interested in empathy and people who identify as highly sensitive. So, in your experience, does becoming an empath or identifying as an empath come from trauma? And if so, what type of trauma?
Right. So in your childhood, when there is unstable upbringing, it leads to what we call complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So it has many layers that I would explain it, but mainly the childhood was not stable. And it could be because there was a sick parent, because of socioeconomic status, people needed to work. It could be because of mental health. And it could be because of so many things, including patriarchy and being born a woman in a patriarchal culture, right? So, yeah, the trauma is very much relational, where the child didn't get their needs met, their needs of guidance, unconditional love, attention to their needs, to their internal world. So, what happens is the child becomes more hypervigilant to the external world because as a child, you seek safety from around you. And when what's around you is not safe, you develop what I call the octopus. So, usually, to have a very well regulated nervous system, it's important to be in tune with your internal experience, right? Like, what's going on around me? Okay, I feel maybe I was talking a bit too fast. I was feeling heat building up. Okay, I will slow down so I can regulate myself. So it happens as a little baby at very minute levels as the child is growing up with feedback from the parent of safety. I'm here for you. What can I do for you? But when the roles are reversed and the child has to be in the parent role, making sure everyone is okay, everything is okay, what's going on, takes on a lot of responsibility. There's no attention inside. The attention outside. What shall I do to deserve love? What shall I do to belong love? Another layer is when people are told, you're not good enough if you don't do this. You don't belong to the family if you don't do this. So instead of developing internally attention, interoception, you have external attention. What's happening? So the empath is dedicated to see what's happening outside. How is someone else feeling? And then, if they're not feeling good, I'm not good. So they develop the skills to make other people feel good. You understand? And that's
Yeah.
the trauma. The trauma truly is the disconnection from the self.
Mm.
Because as a child, in order to connect to yourself, you need your primary caregiver to connect to you in a calm, soothing way,
Mhm.
Wow.
and available.
Mhm.
The child will have a temper tantrum. The parent has a choice, can either, oh my God, what shall I do?
Mhm.
Panic, or take a breath, pay attention, and try to calm the child.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah.
it's
Yep.
really big topic.
That really
Yes.
makes a lot of sense because I think we both ticked those boxes that you
Mhm.
gave. I mean, Danny grew up in a family where both of her parents had to work.
Mhm.
And I grew up where my mom had a chronic illness. And for most of my adolescence, before high school, she was in the hospital a lot, at least once or twice a year for weeks at a time.
Mhm.
And I have a biological father who wasn't in the picture. So I
Mhm.
grew up very quickly having to, like you said, survey my environment and make sure that everybody else was safe, taken care of, worrying about my mom because she's sick. And so from a very young age, I was very hyper aware of everyone else's energy and feelings. I could feel very
Mhm.
quickly when
Mhm.
something was off.
Mhm.
Wow. This makes a lot of sense, right? You make a lot of sense, Christine, because this is what you had to do to survive. Like I say in my bio, peeling the survival skills, right?
Mhm.
So that was a survival skill. And the goal, is to turn the octopus inside.
Yeah.
What feels good for me? What
Mhm.
doesn't feel good for me? Actually, and that's where the boundaries come in, right? That when you start feeling, what resonate, what doesn't resonate, what's good, what's not good, what can you do to make yourself feel better, you start seeing, no, this doesn't feel good. And then you start filling your cup with what feels good more and more.
Mm, so true. Yeah, I think just listening to it, I'm feeling two ways because I'm thinking about my upbringing and how I grew up in my childhood and all the things that I felt like became my responsibility or things that I had to take care of. Both of us are the oldest and we're the eldest daughter. So growing up in a culture where, which we'll get to a little bit later, where that's just assumed of you that you're just going to take over that responsibility. I'm thinking about it through my own perspective, but also through the perspective of my daughter, who I know is experiencing her own, I guess you could say, traumas in a way. Because, like you said, no one's perfect. And there are decisions to be made in life that will not always be helpful to a child in the short term,
Right.
but in the long term, it makes sense. So, just what you said about the temper tantrum when she's getting those overwhelming feelings, I try to acknowledge as much as I can that I do have a choice in those moments to help her regulate because screaming at someone who's already at a high level of emotion or yelling at them is so unhelpful and teaches them that that's how that's always going to go. I'm going to have a high emotional reaction. It's going to be met with a high emotional reaction. And it's very beneficial to me because I remember a lot of the time having those moments myself as a child and maybe not being met with that calm, gentle, like, it's okay, let me help you. It's okay to feel these feelings. So it is very interesting to think about it now. I have two different lenses, I think.
You are a cycle breaker, my friend.
Mm.
You see, and that's what I work on is the intergenerational trauma. Because
Mm-hmm.
your mother, the reason she was like this was because of her childhood trauma. That's what
Yes,
she learned. And
100%.
she passed it on.
Mm-hmm.
And we're living in a time where we have a lot of cycle breakers. And that's what you're doing. You're doing sacred work. You're doing the internal work to be present for your daughter
Mm-hmm.
in a different way than your mother was present for you.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, she had a whole conversation with me about this yesterday. She's also the eldest daughter of four.
Mhm.
And she has a very different relationship with her parents than her siblings. And so I can tell she has done a lot of work. I do
Mhm.
acknowledge that it definitely didn't start with me and that it started really small with just really specific choices. I think that all of the women before me and my family have made to get me to this spot. So it's like
Right?
someone's broken something, even if it was a little
Yes.
thing. I know everyone
Yes.
before me has worked on something to get me to where I am. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like step by step. They're all climbing a ladder.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, maybe each person breaks a link
Mm-hmm.
so that you then
Mhm.
have the strength to destroy the whole chain.
Yes.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They kind
Yeah.
of open the doors for you to be here, right? They already, like, our parents give us the gift of life,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all they can do. And then they can try their best, but it's up to us what to do with this gift, which is such a
Yes.
blessing to be here.
Yeah. 100%.
Piggybacking off of talking about families, I know that you work a lot in IFS. Can you let us know, or our audience know, what IFS is if they don't know already?
Sure. So IFS is a modality in therapy. It's called internal family systems, and it's based on parts work. So there's been a lot of previously to IFS other therapies that use parts work, but IFS is gained a lot of popularity because it's very internal, like I said, the interoception. So it's based on the fact that we all have parts. We all have, part of me wants this, part of me wants that, part of me feels this, but we all have this conflict. And we all have inside us a pure self that is always untouched, in spite of any trauma that you have gone through. It's untouched. And the parts actually are part and parcel of us. It's like your hand, you can't cut it off. But it gets burdened because of the trauma you experience. And when you're a child, these parts become burdened because they want to protect you. For example, the empath part got burdened with watching out for how other people are feeling because it witnessed neglect. The parent was out working, or let's say the duty was to clean the house because mother is sick, or do all the work, so you have to be working all the time. That's another part that is always vigilant. What's missing, wants to fix it. So you develop these parts, and they come in categories. There's one category of parts is called managers. The goal of all the parts is to make sure no harm comes to the self. Whatever harm the self has endured as a child, the neglect, the abusive parents, whatever it is, it doesn't want it to happen again. So the firefighters are another category. And so they want to regulate the nervous system of the person to keep it safe. So the firefighters usually are addictive behaviors. One of the addictions is love relationships, like having to be in a relationship, wanting validation, wanting external validation. It could be alcohol, it could be your phone, Instagram, it could be watching TV, it could be Amazon problem. We all have some of these firefighters. It's this inability to be quiet, to see what's happening outside. And it's actually helping to regulate the nervous system in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And the managers could be the caretakers of other people. Okay, what do you need? In the case of the empath, what do you need? Shall I do this? Some people might be OCD. They want to make sure everything is clean all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's how I feel safe. That's how I feel calm.
Mm-hmm.
Every person has a different type of acting out in the managers or the firefighters. And that makes who you are, your so called character.
Okay.
However, this is not the real you, because the managers and the firefighters are, in effect, practicing your survival strategies. So when we do this therapy, it takes a while for people to acknowledge that these behaviors are protective survival strategies. And then we get to know, what are these protective strategies trying to do for you? They're trying to keep you away from harm.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, they're protecting an exile, which is the core wound of abandonment and neglect and abuse that the child felt, that those managers and exiles don't want you to feel it again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot, right? And
Yeah.
this pain is very big for many people, and it's pushed away because you don't want to think, my mother was bad or my father
Right.
did something bad, because actually they were trying their best,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's very beautiful and very layered and very complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think even when you're doing the work and going back to your childhood and addressing your traumas, a lot of times I had felt guilty because I'm like, well, I did have a great, loving mom. And when I was a toddler, she remarried and he adopted me and raised me as his own. And I'm like, well, I also had a great dad. So I almost felt guilty exploring these things because I'm like, I, for the most part, had a happy childhood, but I was at the back of my mind always wondering, is this going to be the day where my mom goes back in the hospital? Is she going to come out of the hospital? Am I going to have to help raise my brothers because my mom is going to be hopefully still on this planet and being able to function? But it's just always that fear. As a child, you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I started doing IFS work, I have the book and I want Danny to read it. I met a lot of my parts and faced them that were really scary. And one of my parts is this perfectionist, always needs to be busy, always needs to feel productive. And when I really sat with that part and I asked them to kind of, can you step to the side so I can address this hurt part? It was 8-year-old me crying, telling me that I just don't want anyone to be mad at me or upset at me for dropping the ball.
Yeah.
So, what advice do you give to people doing the work who have that guilt?
So the guilt itself is a part. The
Wow, okay.
guilt is a protective part because it's keeping you attached to the family. Makes sense? Because really, it's about having your own back. And if you have the back of your inner child, doesn't mean that they have to be bad, right? It's in the past. It's you are becoming your own loving parent.
Yeah.
And the loving parent will have your back, right?
Very
You
true.
had a difficult time. You were freaking out as a kid, doing things you shouldn't have done. That's not right. But it doesn't mean that your mother was bad for being sick, but you have to be your own ally.
Yeah.
So the guilt, what ultimately happens is that you have to put light on the guilt and thank the guilt, because the guilt comes with shame. It's like you're being a bad daughter, right? As an empath, there's a big highlight on being a good daughter. You have to be the good daughter. You have to be the good daughter. What a good daughter would say, I didn't get my needs met as a child. So
Right.
the guilt is the gatekeeper to keep you a good daughter, because you have the image of the perfectionist, perfect good daughter who never spilled the milk or that, right?
Right.
So it's all good. Dick Schwartz has a book called No Bad Parts. I love that book.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the book that I want Danny to read.
Okay, I definitely will. Yeah, it's a lot. It sounds like it's very complex and that we're only just scratching the surface of it. But just to hear some of these insights are very important because I suppose the first step to unraveling everything or peeling everything back, as you say, would be just to have the knowledge first. Because if you have no idea what's going on, then you're always going to function in this state where you have all of your parts and the parts that are gatekeeping and protecting you from the hurt instead of healing from those. We watched Inside Out too.
I love it. I
and,
love that film.
and
Makes a lot of
so, yeah, so the second part, spoiler alert, there is a vault in Riley's brain. And in the vault, there's a deep, dark secret. And it's like this big guy, and he's like got a hood on. And so it just kind of reminds me like maybe that's one of your parts that you have to address, but it's so scary. You don't want to look at it, but that's where you have to knock on the door and you have to say, I'm actually ready to address this. And you can come out of the vault now.
Yeah, so that's what we do in therapy. You develop enough what we call self energy. So you have to develop enough of your calmness and regulating your nervous system so that you can then shed the light on more parts that are hiding. Like, for example, guilt and shame are one of those big parts that are like,
Yeah.
or
Yes.
jealousy, or those other big emotions that people think, I shouldn't be jealous or I shouldn't feel ashamed.
Yeah, shame and guilt are definitely big ones.
Yeah.
For sure.
As far as anxiety, do you think that that is a firefighter?
Sure, yes, it's a firefighter and manager, both.
Oh.
It depends on how it shows up, but categorizing them doesn't do, I think, Firefighters really are addictions. Firefighters
Okay.
are big reactions and addictions. So if anxiety manifests as a big reaction and addiction, then yes, it's a firefighter. Managers are more functional until they become not so functional. But firefighters are quick. When manager activity doesn't help, firefighters come to the scene.
I see. Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
They're like, alarm, the alarm.
Yeah.
So, kind of bringing it for a circle, you talked about reparenting yourself, but how can somebody who's listening use the tools of IFS to regulate their nervous system?
So I like to use both IFS and nervous system regulation. They go hand in hand.
Okay.
So one of the exercises is imagining there's a table, okay? And then inviting your parts to show up at the table. And usually the part that wants your attention most sits at one place. And one of the things I do is, which Dick taught us, right, is to draw the parts. The first thing that will be very helpful is to map out the parts because they work like in constellations.
Okay.
Right? There's systems, it's internal family systems. So I've identified several of my systems that work in different situations for me. There's many parts in one part that like work together for something, and then other parts that work together on something. And you have to, it takes time and curiosity. So you have to develop curiosity and empathy for those parts. And a lot of the time, people are not happy with the parts and they say, I'm angry at this part. Why does it do this? You know, the first thing I would advise someone is to notice that that also is a part.
Okay.
The anger at yourself is a part. And what is it trying to do for you, right? It wants to cut it off because it just want to get better usually.
Right.
Yeah.
And because we live in a world, we have to be perfect. We have to feel good all the time. Like, no, it's like this. So
Right.
developing, enlarging, like creating capacity for your internal system, pushing back against the pressure, against the judgment, noticing when you have judgment, and just knowing that you survived all these years, you're going to survive, and creating this pillow of safety for yourself with
Yeah.
proof that in spite of everything, you made it. And so you create space for those parts and you welcome them and you create more space. And when it's too much, you take a break. And always regulate yourself. Notice what feels good for you. For example, I went all the way to put a hammock in my apartment.
Oh, I love
I
that.
have a hammock and I really love swinging on it. And a lot of the times I take a nap in my hammock and
sounds great.
I just sleep. So whatever it takes, you know, dancing, music, is to nourish your inner child that didn't have the childhood they deserve.
Very true.
Yeah.
That's so
how you nourish
interesting.
yourself.
Yeah, everything feels so interconnected. We interviewed Taylor Elise Morrison yesterday, who has done amazing work in self-care. And one of the things she said was just listening to yourself and then applying what you've heard from you to how you can better your self-care. And it doesn't have to be a face mask and all the things that society tells you what self-care is. It's whatever it means to you. So I think like a hammock sounds incredible. I'm gonna
I went
think about
all
that.
the way. I got someone
Yeah.
to drill my ceilings and I put it. But I mean, that's just like after years of, you know, listening to myself and, you know, why should I go out to find the hammock? It's winter in Toronto. There's not easy way
Right.
to find the hammock. And it's my place. I have the freedom to do whatever I want.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So we do want to talk about community with you. How does being an empath affect how you show up in your community, whether that's your family or your culture, your hobbies,
Society as a
society?
whole.
So there's different ways it shows up. Many times empaths are healers in the healing profession, right? And they could be in families. It could be the person who cooks and takes care of everybody, or in community it will be the caretaker, usually the one that maybe a lot of the time people are attracted to for them to solve your problems. Let's say, because then the empath will listen and will solve people's problems. So you'll have a lot of what we call maybe energy vampires. You have to be careful of. Because there
Yes.
are some people who, might really need a listening ear, and then they take care of themselves. But then there's are people who, they're always in problems, looking for a rescuer, and so you could draw different kinds of people. So they show up as helpers, as caretakers, as healers.
Yeah, I definitely identify with that because my entire life, like you said, I have always attracted people who need help in some kind of way, broken partners, people who also have experienced childhood trauma. And I was conscious of it, but I didn't know where it stemmed from. So then doing the work and realizing that I'm an empath, I'm like, oh, I'm definitely a magnet for that. So how can empaths protect themselves, still be available to be healers, but really look internally, like you said, and make sure that they're taking care of themselves first?
Healer, heal thyself. That's the saying. There's papers written about this. Healer, heal thyself. So first of all, pain is the first teacher, right? So for example, after running on automatic, being the helper, right? Being an empath on automatic, it makes sense, right? And then these people get drawn, and the helper is used to that feeling and gets validation from it and gets seen and is doing what they're used to. It's the old neurowiring until it hurts. And when it hurts, that's when I'm hoping someone will realize that they are responsible for their experience. Even though these people got drawn, we are all responsible, because the pain is telling you this is not good for you, right? So the pain is the teacher. And then what happens is you start listening to yourself. You listen to the pain. You literally listen to the pain and learn the lesson. And then you watch yourself. You watch yourself. What am I getting from this relationship? And the important thing is learning, because empaths have to relearn what it means to be in healthy relationships. There was no example of healthy relationships. And there's books out there, there's modalities out there. Because, empaths often come from enmeshed families, right?
Yeah.
Let's say there is everybody's helping everybody, but you don't have to create an enmeshed relationship to be of service. You have to be of service to yourself first, fill your cup to the brim, and when your cup overflows, then other people get what you want. And you start learning what a healthy relationship is by first understanding, parenting yourself, loving yourself to the max. You might in the past not notice people who are healthy psychologically, because there's no, like, the octopus, there was the helper, right? So the octopus actually needs a surface to attach to. But when you turn your octopus inside, there's no surface to attach to that's unhealthy. And the octopus comes from the unhealthy wanting to rescue and help other people. So your octopus is inside. So you're independent and you're beautiful, you're glowing, you see your beauty, your eternal soul beauty, right? And it starts shining because you're filling your cup. And then
Right.
you start attracting some people who are healthy, and people who start draining your energy, it just glosses over you. You're not interested because the octopus tentacles are now inside. And for the outside, you're shining your beauty. You're shining, your light. And the relationships have to be independent relationships. But ultimately, all relationships trigger us in one way or another. So there's always a chance to see how we can improve in relationships to show up as the best part. Long story short is you have to really love yourself and stop doing the empath thing, which is a lot of the time getting a sense of achievement from being that person, and grieving and saying no a lot to
Right.
many things. Like, maybe in the beginning it's juicy, but then it's like, no,
Right.
sorry.
Setting the boundary.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We talk about that a lot.
Yeah. It
And
was one.
setting the boundary with yourself, setting the
Yes.
boundary with your octopus, saying, I
Mhm.
know you think this is juicy,
Yeah.
but I've got better juice for you.
So
Yeah.
true. Yeah. It makes sense. It's wants to go 8 different directions because it sees all this stuff, the juicy stuff that it wants to grab and hold on to. It's like being in a relationship, like you said, with a broken partner or a friendship who it's almost as if that person is always needing from you and never reciprocating. It's like, oh, well, it's like the better they get, the better I
It
do.
is so compelling.
Mm-hmm.
It is so compelling, right? It's a trauma bond,
Yeah.
right? That's a trauma bond when it's
Yep.
so compelling, when you're like, oh, but they like, that's when you're like, oh,
Right.
Yep.
let's go. Nobody needs anybody. And that's the thing. It's a trauma bond because when you're a child, you needed your parents. Your parents needed you.
Mm-hmm.
They made it seem like they needed you and you needed them because you really needed them to be okay, or else you won't be okay. And that's the trauma. But as an adult, one of the things I do in IFS and nervous system regulation is you say, how old are you today? Where are you living today? What's your address, orientation to time and place? Because the parts are stuck in the past.
Right.
And then, when you're in a romantic relationship, you don't need the other person to survive. But it feels like it. But actually, you don't. Because a relationship should be based on compatibility, not, oh, it's impossible love, so I better chase after it because he needs, that's like, okay, they need help.
Yeah,
For
girl, you're
example.
preaching to the
But they
choir
need
with that one.
like they need to figure
Yeah.
their stuff out, and then you set your standards. I need someone who got his shit together. Girl, I got my shit together. I'm an empath.
Yeah.
Yes.
We are
Yeah.
both on that journey.
Right. It's a tough journey to be on for sure. It's realizing that like I really got to the point where I realized I'm like, oh gosh, like I need to step completely away from anybody really that's not within my inner circle. And I just mean like living amongst other people, but emotionally and mentally, like really step away and be with me. Because I
Yes, getting to
was,
know yourself,
yeah, because
because
I was
that,
away from myself.
and it makes sense that you were away from yourself because nobody was close to you, really, to you as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to get close to yourself. Makes sense?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
because we need this kind of blanket of love for ourselves to be able to give it. But we never got it as children,
Yeah.
as empaths, right? You
Mm-hmm.
didn't have that. So
No.
you have to have it at some point, and nobody can give it to you except you first.
Right.
Yeah. I think that I built up a lot of resentment for people because nobody was able to meet me or no one knew me as deeply as I knew them. And so
Yeah.
I threw myself into
Mhm.
all of these things where I could really understand others, which also led me to understanding myself. I love astrology. I've been studying astrology for like 10 years. And I realized that's a tool, but it's also a trauma thing because I attached myself to this thing because I'd never felt understood or like people took the time to get to know me. But I spent so much time getting to know others and their needs.
So, we give away what we need the most for ourselves. So, whatever you want someone else to give you, it's a sure rule that it's a thing you have to give yourself.
So
That
true.
that's just a rule. Put it in your diary book. Whatever I think someone else needs to give me and I have resentment, they don't give it to me,
Mm-hmm.
I have to give it to myself.
Yeah.
Right.
Hammock in the ceiling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm going to start taking notes and noticing now.
Right. It's so
Yeah,
true.
yeah. And we run away from our pain because all of this empath, firefighter, manager, it's running away from the pain of the exile. And that's why we never, it's never bad what you did. So the whole point is to love yourself. Even though you think you did something to hurt yourself, you were doing it from a place where the pain was too much to bear. And that's the only thing you knew how to do. So self-love
Right.
again.
So interesting. Wow.
I know I get serious, man.
No, I love it.
Yeah, we love it.
You're giving us so
100%.
much to think about.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so we'll just jump right into the last question that we have for you here. It's a big one because we talk about this a lot on the podcast. Are multicultural women conditioned to serve?
Patriarchy, patriarchy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm from the Middle East, right? And I mean, for the most part, yes, women are in many cultures. Like you can talk about, the cultures you're from, is that the women I find have the duty to do the emotional burden of the family, of the man, right? The father, the brother. Of course, like for example, I have clients, right, that the father would get angry or do something wrong and then never apologize. And the mother would cry and beg and plead with the daughter to just keep going and talk to the father and be a good daughter
Mm-hmm.
to the father. Even the father betrayed, the father was unreasonable, called her names, just to keep going, right? The emotional labor, that's a big
Mm-hmm.
one. And then, of course, the cooking, the cleaning. I have clients where, the brother can go out, have fun. The girl has curfew. The girl has to clean and tidy while the brother doesn't have to. Or the brother can go into the business and the girl stays at home. So a lot of the time, and this comes, I mean, it's unfortunate, but yeah, a lot of the time.
I suppose so. I guess from personal experience, I grew up in a Latino household, but I would say that it's very different from my Latina, specifically since we are speaking of women, Latina counterparts, because I'm not first generation. Both my parents were born here in the States, and I think at least one grandparent was born in the States. So I'm like, I call myself second generation ish because it's
Mhm.
like not all of my grandparents were born in the United States, but some were, right? And some immigrated here from Mexico. So I would say that I had, in relation to or in comparison to other Latina people, women, that it wasn't necessarily the same because my mom grew up that way. She has a sister and two brothers, and her being the eldest daughter, she's expressed on many occasions how she was held responsible for a lot of things, like taking care of her three younger siblings. And
Mhm.
when it was time to clean the house or do household work, that it was always her and her sister. And their brothers
Mhm.
could just go and just
I know.
live their
Mm.
life and be about their life. And that is so ingrained in the culture. And we call it's like the Mexican American or Spanish version of toxic masculinity is called like
Yes,
machismo.
that's how they teach the men to be narcissists, to be, I mean, not every man is a narcissist, and
Right.
narcissism is very specific, but that's how they
Mm-hmm.
teach some men to be entitled
Yes.
and to
Wow.
use women for their whatever. But not all men are like this, I have to highlight.
Yes.
Yes. That's always understood. Like, my dad is not like that. My mom was never taught by her mom how to cook because their mom basically did everything for everybody, my grandma.
Mhm.
And so when my mom met my dad knew how to cook. And she was like, "What's this?" You know, she did not grow
Wow.
up with a man picking up anything. A stove, don't touch the stove. Whenever they come into the kitchen, it's to eat, and it's to eat on time, and it's to be served before everybody
Wow.
else. So
Wow.
she's meeting my dad, cooking her like this great meal because my dad grew up differently as well because his dad cooked a little bit. We're all Mexican, many of us Mexican American, but we still have these tiny little intricacies, what we talked about earlier, where it's like different people breaking different links. And it could
Right.
be very small, but it's very significant. A man in
Yes.
the kitchen when
It's a
it's
big
supposed to be
deal.
a woman's job is a huge deal,
Yes.
especially just specifically speaking to my culture. So it was very interesting that the way that my mom grew up with her parents, how she attracted someone like my dad, who was
Mm.
essentially completely opposite of her father.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting to think about. And then as I go through my journey, I'm figuring out other things, how my situation really more so relates to my grandma's. And I'm like, oh, it's so
Hmm.
interesting because I didn't grow up that way, but my mom did. So
Right.
she told me, she's like, it like skipped a generation. I'm like, well, that kind of, it happens
Yes. Yeah.
where
Yeah.
we attract different people for different reasons. So I think in
Absolutely.
the Latino culture, that's pretty much well understood. And I think that there's a lot of cycle breakers, like you said, in our generation, and especially the generation after us, Gen Z, who are just really about their business and gathering information and trying to build different family dynamics for sure.
Yes.
But for you, you have a little bit of you
I
have
do.
different insight on growing up. So go ahead.
Yeah. And I think that, like I shared before, my mom being sick also made it different
Mm-hmm.
because my mom is also very much a caretaker, but she had to live a lot of her life being taken care of.
Mm.
And so naturally, my dad had to step into some of those roles, but he also was the only one working. So a lot of times he was working 2 or 3 jobs just to like keep food on the table. So I would either be watching my siblings or we would be watched by our grandparents a lot. So yeah, I think I have a different experience just because it was more survival, I think. And it was communal in the fact that everybody stepped in to try and help in some way, whether it was like my mom's best friend, who is like another mom to me, or, you know, my aunts and uncles and things like that. I think that despite having this trauma, as you said, from growing up with a mom who physically couldn't be there for certain things and in certain time periods, I think that I'm grateful for my community because at least I had somebody. I had somebody who could pick us up from school. I had somebody to make sure that we ate. And so, yeah, I think I had a different experience for that reason.
Even with both my parents, most of the time working full time, I did have the responsibility of taking care of my younger brother, but they made sure that there were also adults in my life who they trusted fully that would do the same. You know, they can't get us from school. I'm going to my grandma's after school, and that's like the best place to go. You know, for me growing up, that was a very safe space for me to be in, because it's like at my nana's house, I get a homemade, you know, bean and cheese burrito, and I get to sit and eat it in front of the TV and watch my favorite show. And then also my brother's taken care of too. So it was like, I can relax. I was like,
Right,
oh, I'm
right.
at my
You,
nana's
you
house.
had a
I can
place
relax.
to let someone to take care of you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's the patriarchal thinking, the paradigm of the patriarchy, where the man is more he's to do the outside work and the woman to do the inside work. And this thinking comes from, you know, women are fragile and they're not smart and they can be easily taken advantage of. And in the immigrant population that I work with, a lot of the time, you know, immigrant parents think, the way I put it, that if a woman, if they have a daughter in Canada and they just go become Canadian, it's sex, drugs, and alcohol for the girl. And it's like the worst case scenario for an immigrant parent. The ones with extreme patriarchy that don't trust their own children, they don't trust themselves. This is very like rigid thinking. And so they make sure the girl stays at home, does the housework while the brother goes out. And it just creates toxicity because the girl obviously is brought up Canadian and she's like, what's up with you? What's going on? And so this really creates a very toxic dynamic and a lot of trauma. Or sometimes the girl might absorb the values and have a lot of underlying issues inside that will take more time to uncover. It depends. Yeah.
Right.
So it's
Depends on the
interesting
person.
how it manifests, this patriarchy manifests differently depending on the situation, the immigration, and how recent or how not recent.
Yeah.
Right.
I enjoy talking about patriarchy and toxic masculinity because I'm a firm believer that it's not just toxic to the people around men, it's toxic to men. And patriarchy is toxic to everybody because it's this level of societal standards that I don't think anyone would be able to live up to. And trying to fit a man into like the provider role doesn't allow them room for growth and doesn't allow
No
them.
emotions.
Yeah.
No emotions.
Yes,
It's like,
100%.
I don't know why, but I've had so many male clients recently.
Wow.
That's great news.
Yeah,
I love
and
it.
it is, they're like emotions.
Right.
What are those?
It's so unsafe for them. It's been so unsafe for them to express it, especially within immigrant communities, within Black and Brown communities. It is not acceptable. You are told that you are less than, you're told that you're fragile or weak. And that is left for the women to do, is just process emotions.
And then the women have to do the emotional labor. This doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, what can we do just to wrap this all up for our feelers? That's what we call our community. What can we do in our daily lives and in our own small communities to challenge that so that hopefully in the next generations, the restriction that comes with the patriarchy is not felt so heavily on our shoulders?
You know, it's again, make yourself happy. That's it. Everybody carries their cup, fills their cup.
Yeah.
Right? And, you know, I prefer people not to be combative. So how can you challenge patriarchy from a place of self-responsibility and self-love and
Yeah.
seeing your potential and manifesting your potential, right? Seeing yourself, like, even if you come from patriarchy, that doesn't mean that you are the translation of patriarchy.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yes.
Because also patriarchy, they think that they have to protect women, right? But we don't need their protection. Maybe ages ago, women needed men's protection, but right now we don't, unless you're walking down the street and there is a criminal against you. It'd be nice to have a big muscle man next to you.
Yeah.
Right. Or a muscle woman. Yeah. I think
Or a
that,
muscle woman.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think anyone can help anyone. I've seen communities of women band together and make sure that women are safe. They're making sure that each other are safe when they're going outside, because
exactly.
unfortunately that is just the world that we live in. Especially here in the United States, you hear a lot of crazy stories. So I
Mhm.
think challenging that and making sure that everyone starts with themselves,
Yeah.
is the best advice. And not easy in the sense that the work is easy, but it's essentially the easiest choice because what you have is you, right? So if everyone takes themselves and we all kind of put ourselves into just a me box for a moment, not to be selfish or only think of myself, but do the work for myself so that when I'm out of my box, I'm coming with a full cup, right? It's overflowing. So
Yeah.
I can
Yeah, yeah,
give
yeah.
from it. I can't give
And
from a half empty cup.
we also live in a very, the beauty industry, and women's
Mm-hmm.
bodies and women's beauty is a patriarchal machine.
Mm-hmm.
It's a capitalist patriarchal machine, right? So when women give into that, you're giving into the patriarchal ideal that a woman should look a specific way to
Right.
be worthy, right? And that aging does not exist, right? Like
Right.
women
Yeah.
age, we're made of magic, we're made of hormones and wax and the moon. We're special,
Mm-hmm.
like getting into our femininity and loving it
Mm-hmm.
and honoring it, because it is very special to be a woman.
Very.
It is. Yeah.
100%
It is
agreed.
beautiful. It's
Yes.
and you have to really get in touch with your beautiful, the true femininity, which is, it's multi-layered. It's about
Mm.
receiving. It's about caring in a very gentle way.
Yeah.
So true. I saw someone the other day, probably on TikTok, saying that my life changed when I stopped dressing for the male gaze and started dressing for the female gaze. And I'm like, I love that. I'm like, I want to go out in the world and I want to be seen by other beautiful women who have done or are doing the work that I think a lot of us are doing. And I loved that because I was like, oh, it's true. It's very a subconscious choice that I think a lot of us make. And every day, like just throughout the day, we're probably making choices that we're not even aware of that adhere to this patriarchal idea of how women are
Mhm.
supposed to look and
And,
behave.
and when you sleep well, when you eat well, when you have a well-regulated nervous system, when you're connected to yourself and to other people in a healthy way,
Yeah.
you shine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
thank
that's what you
you.
have to do. And you show, amazing stuff to your daughters.
I have an amazing support system here. She's got a whole community of people
Crew.
here that show her, yes, a crew that
Yeah.
show her so many different ways of like dealing with things. And she's already so like beyond. I really do think that she's been here before. I do feel like my child has a little something extra going on. I'm like not quite sure what it is yet, but yeah, for sure. That's the whole goal, right? Is to build up the next generation to be better. So, what
Yeah.
a great conversation.
I know. I'm so glad that we had you on. It sounds like what you're saying is everything points back to yourself and self love. And eventually, we're going to, when we all can show up consciously, we're going to
Mhm.
create that ripple effect. So, thank you so much for this entire time. I know that our feelers are going to love it. This is already
Yes.
becoming one of my favorite conversations. So, thank you so much for your time and for spending your evening with us. We're so grateful.
Thank you so much for the both of you for having me.
Of course.
And I
Thank
love your
you.
platform. I think you're doing great work.
Oh,
Thank
thank you so
you.
much. We appreciate that. I will have you back again 100%.
Yes, we would love that.
Mhm.
I would
Okay.
love that. We can talk about so much more.
Wow, you guys, that was a really, really good episode. I'm almost still like processing because it was just so much good stuff. I'm even going to go back and listen to this episode so I can hear that again.
100%. There were so many things where I felt like I don't know if you could tell how deeply I was listening to her and making sure that I was absorbing everything, but it's very difficult to do that. And I'm a note taker just by nature.
Yeah.
So I know that I'll be going back and like taking notes and figuring out what the steps are to look at all my parts basically and figure out where they kind of came from.
Right. It's obvious that she has done so much work with empaths and on empathy, because it's literally in the first 5 minutes it was like,
Yep.
oh, did she like write, like did she look into our diaries or something? Because I feel like she knows exactly who we are and where we came from.
Yeah, basically that she just has so much knowledge within brown communities and immigrant communities specifically, that she understands the pressure being from the Middle East herself. So it's so important to open up these conversations, because in psychology as a whole and in a lot of sciences, women, especially being Black and brown, and men for that matter,
Yeah.
we are not looked at in a lot of the sciences. So
Yeah.
within psychology, studies are fairly new as it
Yeah.
relates to studying people who are not white and who are not white men. So I think opening up this conversation to someone like Nisrine, who has done the work and is an expert in her field and can speak to a lot of these different things and is constantly learning herself, which is like, I love that. I am a full advocate of like lifelong learning,
Yeah.
and never feeling like you have to stop because you know everything, right?
When we were saying goodbye, logging off the call, she was like, oh, one last thing. I'm learning this new thing that I would love to come back and talk to you guys about. I'm like, oh,
Yes.
yes. We really want to have her back on to talk about relationship.
Yes. Really diving deep into how to maintain really good relationships
Yeah.
and get into relationships that are healthy.
Yes.
So that's 100% something we want to talk about. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you guys really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
We thoroughly enjoyed it. What a
Thoroughly.
wonderful person.
I feel like I walked away with a friend, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Jabria, are you smart? Yes. That's who I
Exactly.
always think of when I say that. Yes, I agree. And that's it for this. I can't say that's it because like that was a lot for this episode, but
Yeah.
that is all for this episode, and we will see you next week. But
Yeah.
before that,
Get ready
let
for
us
the prayer.
pray and let the church, the feelers, say amen. Spirit, grant me the serenity to turn my octopus inward,
The courage to get to know my parts,
and the wisdom to not read a bitch when they try me.
and so it is.
Bye.
Bye.
Toodaloo, bitch.